The silence of deep space was broken by the steady hum of the UES Nightfall as it moved through the darkness between stars. Commander Jake Morrison sat in his captain's chair, watching the endless void through the main screen. His ship was on routine patrol duty near the edge of human space, something they had done 100 times before. "Commander, we're getting something strange," said Lieutenant Bobby Chen from the communication station. His voice carried a note of confusion that made Jake sit up straighter. "What kind of strange?" Jake asked, turning toward the young officer. "It's an encrypted signal, sir, but it's not human. The patterns are completely different from anything we've seen before." Bobby's fingers moved quickly over his controls, trying to decode the mysterious message. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. First contact with alien life had always been a possibility, but humanity had been alone in space for so long that many people had stopped believing they would ever meet another intelligent species. "Can you decode it?" Jake asked. "Working on it, sir. The encryption is complex, but our computers are making progress." Bobby paused, listening to something through his headset. "Commander, I think you need to hear this." The main screen flickered, and suddenly a face appeared that was clearly not human. The being had pale blue skin, large dark eyes, and features that were both alien and somehow familiar. When it spoke, the words came through in perfect English, though there was a mechanical quality that suggested the message was being translated. "People of Earth, my name is Kalara Synth. I am a diplomat of the Zalari people. If you are receiving this message, then perhaps there is still hope for my species." Jake leaned forward, his heart beating faster. The alien's face showed exhaustion and something that looked very much like desperation. "We have been trying to reach your world for many months. Our situation is desperate. My people, the Zalari, are dying. For 300 years, we have been hunted by a species called the Korthak. They have destroyed our worlds, enslaved our people, and turned our children into subjects for their experiments." The image on the screen changed, showing scenes that made Jake's stomach turn. Massive alien ships firing on defenseless cities, beings that looked like Kalara being herded into cages, children separated from their parents and taken away in transport ships. "The Korthak do not simply conquer worlds," Kalara continued. "They reshape them into places of suffering. They study us, break us down, and use us for purposes I cannot describe without weeping. We were once 17 star systems strong. Now we cling to life on a handful of worlds that grow smaller each day." Lieutenant Sarah Kim, the ship's tactical officer, made a sound of disgust. "This is horrible, Commander. How can anyone do this to another species?" Jake held up his hand for silence, though he felt the same anger building inside him. The images on the screen showed Zalari families being torn apart, their homes burning, their people crying out in languages that needed no translation. "We know humans have only recently begun to explore the stars," Kalara said. "We know you have your own concerns and your own territory to protect, but we also know something about your species that gives us hope. You fight for others. You help those who cannot help themselves. This is rare in the galaxy." The scene changed again, showing what appeared to be the interior of a damaged ship. Kalara was speaking from what looked like an escape pod or small transport. "I am the last of my diplomatic corps. My ship was destroyed 3 days ago while trying to evacuate civilians from our colony on Theron 4. I managed to escape, but hundreds of thousands of my people did not. The Korthak will come for our remaining world soon. When they do, the Zalari species will cease to exist." Jake found himself gripping the arms of his chair. He had seen war before, had fought in battles between human colonies, but this was different. This was genocide on a scale that was hard to imagine. "We offer you everything we have," Kalara continued. "Our quantum technology that allows faster travel between stars, star charts of this entire arm of the galaxy, scientific knowledge that could advance your civilization by centuries. All we ask in return is that you help us survive, help us fight back against those who would see us extinct." The alien's large eyes seemed to look directly at Jake through the screen. "We sought salvation among the stars, hoping to find someone who would stand with us against the darkness. Please, people of Earth, do not let our species die in silence." The message ended, leaving the bridge of the nightfall in complete quiet. Jake stared at the black screen for a long moment, his mind racing. Finally, he turned to his communications officer. "Bobby, send this message immediately to Captain Hayes at Fleet Command. Priority 1. Tell her we need an emergency meeting with Admiral Kane." "Yes, sir," Bobby replied, his voice quiet. Jake stood up from his chair and walked to the main screen, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an entire species was facing extinction. Children were being torn from their parents. Innocent people were suffering in ways that challenged the imagination. "Commander," Sarah said softly, "what do you think Command will decide?" Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about the images they had just seen. He thought about human history, about all the times his species had failed to act when others needed help. He also thought about the times they had succeeded, had fought, and died for people they had never met simply because it was the right thing to do. "I think," Jake said slowly, "that the Korthak are about to learn something very important about humans." "What's that, sir?" Jake turned back to his crew, and they could see something in his eyes that had not been there before. It was the look of someone who had seen an injustice that could not be allowed to continue. They're about to learn that when humans decide something is wrong, we don't just sit and watch. We do something about it. The UES Nightfall changed course, heading back toward Earth at maximum speed. Behind them, the stars continued their ancient dance, unaware that the balance of power in the galaxy was about to change forever. The Zalari had sought salvation, but what they were about to receive was something far more powerful. The fury of a species that had decided their cause was worth fighting for. 3 weeks after the Zalari message reached Earth, Lieutenant Colonel Danny Price found himself sitting in the pilot seat of the UES Silent Thunder, the most advanced stealth ship in the human fleet. His orders were simple but dangerous. Get close to Zalari space without being detected and find out exactly what humanity was dealing with. "We're approaching the outer edge of the system," said Sergeant Amy Carter from her position at the sensor station. She was the team's medic, but, like all members of the reconnaissance unit, she was trained for multiple roles. "I'm picking up massive energy signatures ahead." Danny looked at the display screen and felt his blood run cold. Where the mission briefing had suggested there might be a few Korthak ships, he was looking at an entire fleet. Hundreds of alien vessels orbited around what had once been a peaceful Zalari world. "My God," whispered Private Tony Wells, the team's technical specialist. "How many ships are there?" "Too many to count," Danny replied, his voice tight with concern. "Amy, are you getting any life signs from the planet?" Amy worked quietly at her controls for several minutes before responding. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Danny, you need to see this." The main screen changed to show the surface of the planet below. What they saw made everyone on the small ship fall silent. The world that had once been green and blue was now a nightmare of gray metal and red earth. Massive structures covered the landscape like scars, and between them, they could see movement. "Those are prison camps," Danny said, recognizing the patterns from human history. "But they're huge. Each one looks like it could hold millions of people." "It gets worse," Amy said, her hands shaking as she worked the controls. "I'm detecting human-sized life forms, but also much smaller ones. Danny, they have children down there." The image on the screen zoomed in closer, and what they saw next would haunt all of them for the rest of their lives. In a large open area surrounded by walls, they could see figures that were clearly Zalari children, some no bigger than human toddlers, being forced to fight each other while larger figures watched from above. "Those monsters," Tony said, his voice filled with rage. "They're making kids fight for entertainment." Amy suddenly stood up from her station, her face pale but determined. "We have to do something. We can't just sit here and watch this." Danny grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "Amy, I know how you feel. But if we reveal ourselves now, we'll be destroyed, and Earth will never know what's really happening here. We have to get this information back home." Amy looked at him for a long moment, tears in her eyes before slowly sitting back down. "You're right. But Danny, when we do come back, we come back with everything we have. Count on it," Danny replied. While the Silent Thunder continued its secret mission, back on Earth the largest military buildup in human history was already underway. General Henry Ford stood in the command center of the Luna military complex, watching as reports came in from every human colony and military base. "Status report," he said to Colonel Rick Stone, his chief of staff. "All Titan-class battleships are being retrofitted with the new plasma weapon systems," Rick replied, reading from his tablet. "The shipyards are working around the clock. We'll have 200 combat-ready vessels within 6 weeks. What about ground forces? Marine recruitment is up 400% since the president's speech. Every training facility is at maximum capacity. The Corps has never been larger or more motivated." Henry nodded, but his mind was on the intelligence reports they had received. The Korthak weren't just conquerors. They were something far worse. "Any word from Dr. Brooks on the alien biology research?" "She wants to see you immediately, sir. Says she's found something important." Henry made his way to the research level, where Dr. Helen Brooks was waiting for him in her laboratory. The walls were covered with displays showing Korthak anatomy and physiology. "General, I think I've found their weakness," Helen said without preamble. "The Korthak regenerative abilities that make them so hard to kill have a critical flaw." "What kind of flaw?" Helen activated a holographic display showing the internal structure of a Korthak soldier. "Their healing process depends on specific bioelectrical frequencies. If those frequencies are disrupted, their regeneration stops completely. Not only that, but they become incredibly vulnerable to damage." "Can we disrupt those frequencies?" Helen smiled for the first time since Henry had known her. "General, every human ship and weapon system already produces electromagnetic fields in exactly the right range. We don't need to build new weapons. We just need to modify what we already have." Meanwhile, on the other side of Earth, President Patricia Wells stood before the United Nations Assembly. The Great Hall was packed, and cameras were broadcasting her words to every human world and colony. "Fellow citizens of Earth and all our colonies," she began, her voice calm but firm. "Today, we face a choice that will define who we are as a species. We have learned of a people called the Zalari, who are facing complete extinction at the hands of creatures called the Korthak." The president paused, looking out at the faces of the representatives from every nation and colony. "The Zalari are not warriors. They are not conquerors. They are farmers and scientists, artists and teachers. They are parents who love their children and children who need their parents. And they are dying." The hall was completely silent. "Some will ask why this is our responsibility. Why should humans risk their lives for aliens we have never met? I will tell you why. Because if we turn our backs on innocent people who are suffering, then we are not the species I believe us to be. We are not the humans who fought against slavery, who stood up to tyrants, who helped strangers simply because it was right." The president's voice grew stronger. "The Korthak believe that might makes right. They believe that the strong can do whatever they want to the weak. They are about to learn that they are wrong. They are about to learn that humans do not abandon the innocent, and they are about to learn what happens when they threaten children." The applause that followed shook the building. Across human space, recruitment centers were flooded with volunteers. Young men and women who had never fired a weapon in anger signed up to fight for people they had never seen. Veterans came out of retirement to offer their experience. Scientists worked day and night to perfect new technologies. Back on the Silent Thunder, Danny Price was finishing his reconnaissance mission. His ship's memory banks were full of intelligence about Korthak ships, weapons, and tactics. But more importantly, they contained proof of something that would unite humanity like nothing ever had before. "We've got what we came for," Danny said to his crew. "Time to go home and show people what we're really fighting against." As the Silent Thunder slipped away from the nightmare world below, Danny looked back one last time at the prison camps and the suffering they contained. "Hold on," he whispered to the Zalari prisoners he couldn't save yet. "Help is coming. And when it gets here, these monsters are going to learn what human fury really looks like." The galaxy was about to change forever. The Korthak had ruled through fear for 1,000 years. But they had never faced an enemy like humanity. They had never faced a species that would cross the stars to protect strangers, or that became more dangerous the angrier they got. The storm was coming, and it would carry the flag of Earth. The moment the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Vithara Prime, every alarm on every Korthak ship began screaming at once. Admiral Robert Kane stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching as 200 human warships took position around him like a pack of hunting wolves. "All ships report ready for combat, Admiral," said Captain Lisa Hayes from her position at the communications station. Kane nodded, his eyes fixed on the massive Korthak fleet ahead of them. There were nearly 300 enemy ships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. But size wasn't everything, and the Korthak were about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. "Open a channel to all ships," Kane ordered. "This is Admiral Kane to all human forces. Today we fight not for territory or glory. We fight for innocent people who cannot fight for themselves. Show these monsters what happens when they threaten. Children, all ships, attack formation Alpha. Engage at will." The space battle that followed would be talked about for generations. Captain Steve Allen, commanding the destroyer UES Havoc, led the first wave of attackers. His ship was small compared to the Korthak dreadnoughts, but it moved like lightning, while their massive vessels turned like floating mountains. "Target their command ship," Steve ordered. "Fire all railguns." The Havoc's weapons unleashed a stream of metal projectiles moving at incredible speed. The Korthak shields, designed to stop energy weapons, were useless against solid matter traveling at such velocity. The projectiles punched through the alien hull like bullets through paper, causing massive explosions inside the enemy ship. "Direct hit," shouted Lieutenant Karen Young from the weapons station. "Their shields are down by 60%. But the Korthak were not helpless. Return fire from their massive plasma cannons lit up space around the Havoc. Steve threw his ship into a spinning dive, avoiding the worst of the enemy fire while his gunners continued to pound the alien vessel. "This is impossible," came a transmission from the Korthak flagship, translated by human computers. "How are these primitives penetrating our defenses?" The answer came in the form of plasma torpedoes from the battleship UES Thunder Bay. The new weapons, guided by Dr. Brooks' research, carried electromagnetic pulses tuned to disrupt Korthak biology. When they hit, the alien ships didn't just take damage, their crews began to die. Meanwhile, the ground assault was beginning. Colonel Rick Stone's Marines launched from their transport ships in thousands of drop pods, falling toward the surface of Vithara Prime like angry meteors. Rick himself was in the first wave, his pod crashing down in the middle of what had once been the Zalari capital city. "Form up on me," Rick shouted as his Marines climbed out of their pods. Around them, the city was a ruin of broken buildings and alien structures. In the distance, they could see the massive prison complex where thousands of Zalari were being held. Sergeant Beth Turner crouched behind a piece of rubble, her rifle ready. She had volunteered for this mission the moment she heard about the Zalari children. Now, as Korthak soldiers began appearing from their defensive positions, she felt a cold anger settle in her chest. "Contact front," she yelled, opening fire with her plasma rifle. The blue energy bolt struck the nearest Korthak soldier, and something amazing happened. The alien, which should have been able to heal from almost any wound, collapsed, and did not get back up. "The frequency weapons work," shouted Private Mike Davis. "They can't regenerate." The Korthak had ruled the galaxy for centuries through fear and their seeming invulnerability. They were used to enemies who gave up when they realized their weapons were useless. They had never faced humans before. The human Marines didn't just fight. They fought with a precision and fury that the Korthak had never encountered. These weren't desperate refugees or peaceful farmers. These were professional soldiers from a species that had been perfecting warfare for thousands of years. Major Chris Wells led his battalion toward the main prison complex, following intelligence gathered by Danny Price's reconnaissance mission. As they got closer, they could hear sounds that made their blood run cold, the crying of children and the screams of the tortured. "Breaching charges ready," Chris ordered. "We go in fast and hard. Save the prisoners first, ask questions later." Explosion that followed blew a hole in the prison wall large enough for a tank to drive through. The Marines poured into the facility, their weapons ready. What they found inside changed them forever. The Korthak had turned the prison into a laboratory of horrors. Zalari families were separated into different sections. Adults were subjected to medical experiments that would have made human war criminals sick. Children were kept in cages and forced to fight each other for the entertainment of their captors. Sergeant Amy Carter, the medic from the reconnaissance mission, was now part of the assault force. When she saw a group of Zalari children huddled, in a corner she forgot about everything except getting them to safety. "It's okay," she said softly, kneeling down beside them. Even though they couldn't understand her words, her tone was gentle and calm. "We're here to help. You're safe now." But the Korthak guards had other ideas. A massive alien soldier appeared at the end of the corridor, raising a weapon that looked like it could cut a person in half. He aimed it at Amy and the children. He never got the chance to fire. Commander Jake Morrison, who had insisted on joining the ground assault, put 3 plasma bolts into the alien's chest. The Korthak fell backward and did not move. "Are you all right?" Jake asked Amy. "I am now," she replied, still holding the frightened Zalari children. "But Jake, what we've seen here, this isn't war. This is something much worse." Jake nodded, grimly. Throughout the prison complex, his Marines were discovering the full extent of Korthak cruelty. Torture chambers where aliens were slowly killed for research, breeding programs designed to create more slaves, rooms where children were trained to kill each other. "Change of orders," Jake said into his radio, speaking to all human forces. "No prisoners. These things don't deserve mercy." The tone of the battle shifted. The Marines had come to liberate prisoners and defeat an enemy. Now they were eliminating a threat to all decent life in the galaxy. The Korthak suddenly found themselves facing human soldiers who no longer saw them as opponents in a war, but as predators that needed to be put down. In space, the battle was going even worse for the aliens. Admiral Kane's fleet had destroyed over half the Korthak ships and the rest were trying to retreat. But Kane wasn't going to let them escape to threaten other worlds. "Pursue and destroy," he ordered. "Not one of these ships leaves this system." As the human fleet chased down the fleeing Korthak vessels, emergency transmissions began broadcasting from the alien ships to their home worlds. The messages all said the same thing. They had encountered something unprecedented, not just another species to conquer, but beings who fought not for conquest but for justice. The Korthak supremacy, ruling from their distant fortress world, received these messages with growing alarm. For the first time in their history, they were facing an enemy that wasn't afraid of them, an enemy that became more dangerous the more atrocities they discovered. On the surface of Vithara Prime, the last Korthak stronghold fell as the sun was setting. Jake Morrison stood in the ruins of the prison complex, watching as human medics treated thousands of liberated Zalari. Children were being reunited with their parents. Families that had been separated for years were holding each other and crying with joy. Kalara Synth, the Zalari diplomat who had sent the original message to Earth, approached Jake with tears in her large, dark eyes. "Commander Morrison," she said in heavily accented English, "my people sought salvation among the stars, but what you have given us is something far more powerful. You have given us hope that good can triumph over evil." Jake looked around at the scene of liberation and rescue, then back at Kalara. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We're not stopping here. Every world the Korthak have touched, every species they've enslaved, every child they've hurt, we're going to make this right." As night fell over Vithara Prime, the human fleet prepared for the next phase of their campaign. The Korthak had thought they were facing primitives seeking to protect one small species. They were about to learn they had awakened something far more dangerous, humans who had decided that the galaxy needed to change. The news of humanity's victory at Vithara Prime spread across the galaxy, faster than the human ships themselves. On worlds that had lived under Korthak rule for centuries, alien slaves gathered around hidden communication devices, listening to impossible stories of liberation and hope. Admiral Robert Kane stood in the command center of his flagship studying star charts that showed the full extent of Korthak territory. Red dots marked slave worlds, prison planets, and research facilities where innocent beings suffered under alien cruelty. There were hundreds of them. "Admiral, we're receiving messages from 17 different star systems," reported Captain Lisa Hayes. "All of them are asking for help." Kane nodded grimly. The victory at Vithara Prime had been just the beginning. "What's our fleet status?" 230 ships ready for combat, sir. More arriving from Earth every day. And Admiral, we're getting volunteers from the species we've already liberated. The Zalari want to fight alongside us." Kane smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then let's give them that chance. Set course for the Mortis system. Intelligence reports say it's one of their largest slave facilities." 3 days later, the combined human and Zalari fleet dropped out of hyperspace above Mortis 7, a planet that had once been beautiful, but was now covered in massive industrial complexes. Commander Nancy Brooks, who had been promoted after her actions at Vithara Prime, led the advance force toward the planet's surface. "I'm reading millions of life signs down there," reported her sensor operator. "Multiple species, not just Zalari." Nancy felt her jaw tighten. The Korthak weren't just enslaving one race. They were collecting beings from across the galaxy like some twisted zoo. "All units prepare for planetary assault. We're going to free every single prisoner on that world." The battle for Mortis 7 was different from Vithara Prime. This time, the human forces weren't fighting alone. Zalari pilots flew alongside human fighters, their quantum-enhanced ships dancing through enemy fire like living things. On the ground, Zalari soldiers fought beside human marines, their knowledge of Korthak tactics proving invaluable. But the most important change was in the prisoners themselves. When the liberation forces broke open the first prison complex, they didn't find broken, hopeless slaves. They found beings who had heard about the human victories and were ready to fight for their own freedom. "Who are you?" asked a tall, insect-like alien as Nancy's Marines secured the facility. "We're humans," Nancy replied simply. "We're here to help you get free." The alien, who introduced himself as Chitik of the Vaxari people, stared at her for a long moment. "You cross the stars to help strangers?" "That's what we do," Nancy said, handing him a weapon taken from a defeated Korthak guard. "Now, do you want to help us free the rest of your people?" Within hours, the Human Liberation Force had grown to include hundreds of newly freed aliens. Each species brought their own skills and knowledge. The crystalline Nethri could bend light to make themselves invisible. The plant-like Verdani could communicate across vast distances without technology. The mechanical constructs could repair damaged equipment in minutes. General Henry Ford, now commanding liberation operations from Earth, watched the reports with amazement. "We're not just freeing slaves," he told President Patricia Wells during their daily briefing. "We're building an army of every species the Korthak have ever wronged." "How are they responding?" the president asked. "The Korthak are starting to panic. They're pulling forces back to defend their core worlds. For the first time in their history, they're on the defensive." Meanwhile, on the Korthak fortress world of Drakmor Prime, the Supreme Council was meeting an emergency session. These were beings who had ruled through fear for over 1,000 years, who had never known defeat or even serious resistance. "The humans are moving through our territory like a plague," snarled Supreme General Vorlax, his reptilian features twisted with, "Every world they touch turns against us. They are teaching the slaves to fight," added Supreme Scientist Keloth. "Our subjects are no longer afraid of us. They believe they can win." Supreme Overlord Tharkas, eldest and cruelest of the Korthak leaders, slammed his clawed fist on the council table. "Then we must show them the price of rebellion. Order the Yao destruction of the prison world at Kepler 9. Kill every slave there. Let the galaxy see what happens to those who oppose us." But the order came too late. Commander Jake Morrison's task force was already in the Kepler system, having received intelligence about the facility from liberated Vaxari scouts. When the Korthak fleet arrived to destroy the prison world, they found human ships waiting for them. "This is Commander Morrison to all Korthak vessels," Jake broadcast on an open channel. "You came here to murder defenseless prisoners. Instead, you're going to learn what it feels like to be prey." The battle that followed was more one-sided than any conflict in galactic history. The Korthak ships, designed to intimidate and overpower, weaker opponents were no match for human tactics and technology enhanced by alien allies. Within 2 hours, the entire Korthak fleet was either destroyed or fleeing in terror. On the surface of Kepler-9, the liberation was proceeding smoothly, when Sergeant Amy Carter made a discovery that changed everything. In the deepest levels of the prison complex, she found something that made her call for Jake immediately. "Commander, you need to see this," she said, her voice shaking with anger. Jake followed her down a series of corridors to a massive chamber, filled with thousands of small cells. Inside each cell was a child, but not just Zelari children. There were young beings from dozens of different species, all being held in conditions that defied description. "They're collecting children from every species they conquer," Amy said. "This isn't just slavery. This is something far worse." Jake looked at the sea of frightened young faces and felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. These weren't enemy soldiers or even civilian casualties of war. These were innocents who had been stolen from their families for purposes he didn't want to imagine. "Get them out of here," he ordered. "All of them. And Amy, send a message to Admiral Kane. Tell him the rules just changed." The message that went out from Kepler-9 reached every human ship in the galaxy within hours. The liberation campaign was no longer about freeing adult slaves or defeating an enemy military. It was about protecting children who couldn't protect themselves. On Earth, President Wells addressed the United Nations once again. This time her speech was broadcast not just to human worlds, but to every liberated planet in the growing alliance. "My fellow beings of all species," she began. "Today we learned something that changes the nature of our mission. The Korthak are not just conquerors or slavers. They are something far worse. They steal children from their families. They use innocence for experiments. They turn childhood into a weapon of terror." The president paused, letting her words sink in across hundreds of worlds. "To every Korthak leader listening to this broadcast, know this. You have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. You have threatened children, and that is something humans will never forgive. We are coming for you, all of you, and we will not stop until every child you have stolen is back with their family, and you are no longer a threat to anyone." Across the galaxy, the response was immediate. On human worlds, recruitment centers were overwhelmed with volunteers. On liberated alien worlds, entire populations joined the growing fleet. Even neutral species that had stayed out of galactic politics began offering support. The Korthak supremacy, which had ruled through terror for a millennium, suddenly found itself facing something it had never encountered: an entire galaxy united against them. But more than that, they faced humans who had stopped seeing them as an enemy to be defeated and started seeing them as a threat to be eliminated. In the depths of space, Admiral Kane's fleet continued to grow. Human ships were joined by vessels from 40 different species, all united by a single purpose. They weren't just fighting for territory or freedom anymore. They were fighting for the right of children everywhere to grow up safe. The Korthak had sought to rule through fear. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous: the protective instincts of beings who would cross the galaxy to save strangers' children. The predators were about to become the prey, and the hunt was just beginning. The final assault on Korath Prime began with the largest fleet in galactic history. Admiral Robert Kane stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching as over 800 ships took formation around his flagship. Human vessels flew alongside: Zelari quantum ships, Vaxari biocraft, Nethri crystal constructs, and vessels from 45 other liberated species. "All ships report ready, Admiral," said Captain Lisa Hayes. "The Coalition fleet is in position." Kane nodded, looking at the fortress world ahead of them. Korath Prime was the heart of the Korthak Empire, a planet covered in weapons platforms and defended by their most powerful ships. But more importantly, it was where the Korthak leadership had ruled their empire of suffering for over 1,000 years. "Open a channel to all ships," Kane ordered. "This is Admiral Kane to all Coalition forces. Today we end 1,000 years of terror. Today we make sure that no child in this galaxy will ever again fear the Korthak. All ships, begin the attack. The space battle that followed was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. The Korthak threw everything they had at the attacking fleet. Planet-killing weapons, bioengineered monsters the size of battleships, reality-warping technologies that bent space itself. None of it mattered. The Coalition fleet fought with a unity and purpose that the Korthak couldn't understand. Human tactical precision combined with alien technologies created combinations that were devastating. Zalari quantum shields protected human railgun platforms. Nethri light-bending abilities hid Vaxari bioships until they were close enough to strike. Constructs repaired damaged vessels faster than the enemy could destroy them. Their orbital platforms are down, reported Commander Nancy Brooks from her position aboard the assault carrier UES Liberation. Ground forces are ready for deployment. Kane looked at the planet below, knowing that somewhere in the fortress complex is down. There were the beings responsible for centuries of galactic suffering. Begin planetary assault, and Nancy, remember the rules of engagement. Nancy smiled grimly. There were no rules of engagement anymore. Not for the Korthak. Understood, Admiral. See you on the surface. The ground assault was led by Admiral Jake Morrison, who had insisted on commanding the operation personally. As his dropship descended through the atmosphere of Korath Prime, he could see the massive fortress complexes that housed the Korthak leadership. These weren't just military bases. They were monuments to cruelty built on the suffering of billions. 2 minutes to touchdown, called the pilot. Around them, thousands of other dropships filled the sky like falling stars. Jake checked his weapon, one final time. It was a human plasma rifle modified with Zalari quantum technology and powered by Nethri energy crystals. Like everything else in this war, it was a combination of different species working together toward a common goal. The landing was opposed by everything the Korthak could throw at them. Energy weapons that could melt metal, bio-creatures designed to hunt and kill. Defensive systems that had never been breached in 1,000 years of rule. The Coalition forces went through them like they weren't there. Colonel Rick Stone led the assault on the main fortress complex, his Marines supported by warriors from dozens of species. The Korthak defenders, who had never faced real resistance, before broke and ran when they realized their weapons couldn't stop the attackers. Fortress outer defenses are down, Rick reported. Moving to the inner complex. Inside the fortress, the fighting became personal. These weren't soldiers defending their homeland. These were the enforcers and administrators of a system built on torture and slavery. When Sergeant Amy Carter's medical team found rooms full of scientific equipment designed to study pain, something changed in the Coalition forces. They weren't liberating anymore. They were judging. The final battle took place in the Supreme Council chamber, where the Korthak leadership had ruled their empire for generations. Supreme Overlord Tharkas, the eldest and most cruel of their leaders, waited there with his personal guard, expecting to die fighting. Instead, he found himself facing Admiral Jake Morrison and a mixed group of human and alien soldiers. But what shocked him wasn't their weapons or their tactics. It was the complete lack of fear in their eyes. "You cannot kill us all," Tharkas snarled in his translated voice. "The Korthak Empire spans 1,000 worlds." Jake looked at the alien leader with cold eyes. "Your empire is already gone, your fleets are destroyed, your worlds are liberated, you're the last one." "Then kill me and be done with it," Tharkas demanded. Jake shook his head. "Death would be too easy. You're going to live. You're going to see what happens when the species you've enslaved get to decide your fate." The capture of the Supreme Council marked the end of organized Korthak resistance. Across the galaxy, the remaining Korthak forces surrendered or were destroyed by the Coalition fleet. The empire that had ruled through fear for a millennium collapsed in a matter of weeks. But the most important moment came in the aftermath. Representatives from all the liberated species gathered on Korath Prime to decide what to do with their former oppressors. Some called for complete extermination. Others wanted exile to empty worlds. The debate went on for days. Finally, President Patricia Wells spoke for humanity and by extension for the coalition they had built. "We could kill them all," she said to the gathered representatives. We could send them into exile or lock them, away forever. But if we do that, we become the same kind of monsters they were. The chamber fell silent as she continued. Instead, we're going to do something that will be far more difficult for them to endure. We're going to make them fix what they broke. Every world they destroyed will be rebuilt, and they will do the work. Every species they enslaved will be served by them. Every child they stole will be returned to their family, and Korthak hands will help in that reunion. Murmurs of approval began to rise from the assembled delegates. They will spend the rest of their lives undoing the damage they caused. They will learn what it means to help instead of hurt. And their children, raised under our guidance, will never know the cruelty their parents practiced. The vote was unanimous. The Korthak survivors would live, but they would live as servants to those they had wronged. 5 years later, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Coalition space station orbiting the rebuilt world of Vithara Prime. Through the EI windows, he could see Korthak workers helping to construct new cities for the Zalari families they had once enslaved. Kalara Synth joined him at the window, now serving as the Zalari representative to the Galactic Liberation Council. Do you think they understand yet? She asked, watching a group of young Korthak learning to tend gardens under the guidance of Zalari farmers. Some of them, Jake replied. The young ones especially. They're learning that there's a better way to live than through fear and cruelty. Kalara nodded. My people sought salvation among the stars when we sent that first message to Earth. We never imagined we would find partners who would help us transform an entire galaxy. Jake smiled, thinking of all the worlds where former slaves now lived free, where children played without fear, where different species worked together to build something better than what had come before. You didn't just get salvation, he said. You got something better. You got proof that good can triumph over evil, that the strong can protect the weak, and that mercy can be more powerful than vengeance. Below them, the sun set over Vithara Prime, where Zalari children played in gardens tended by the descendants of those who had once enslaved them. Across the galaxy, on hundreds of worlds, similar scenes were playing out. The age of Korthak terror was over, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history. A civilization built on cooperation instead of conquest, on justice instead of fear. The aliens had sought salvation among the stars. What they found was something far more valuable: humans who believed that everyone deserved to be free, and who were willing to cross the galaxy to make that belief a reality. The fury had passed, but the justice it brought would last forever.